Good evening. Your time now is 5:52. I'm Jeannette Reyes.
And I'm Mona Abdi, and this is Off the Record.
Not for real. This is Off the Record.
Do you think that a man should have a close female friend if he's in a relationship?
So, Dr. Marisa G. Franco is a psychologist, New York Times best-selling author, and sought-after friendship expert. What do you do when people mistake your kindness for weakness?
Boundaries are the distance between which I love you and myself at the same time. Do you pick the friend up at the airport? We're in D.C. We got to go to Dulles.
Not Dulles!
We need to start interrogating convenience. We don't realize that we are sacrificing connection often for convenience.
Is confrontation bad? Should you avoid it within friendships?
Try to assume that people will like you. Whereas when we think we'll be rejected, we reject people. Most people are lonely, which to me means it's not an individual issue, it's a systemic issue.
Are female relationships inherently either more toxic or complex?
Men are about half as likely to be vulnerable with their friends in a given week, half as likely to express affection with their friends in a given week.
Friendship breakups.
Dr. Marisa G. Franco, welcome to the group chat.
Thanks so much for having me.
We have been wanting you on this podcast before it was even a podcast, by the way. Like when it was just a thought in our heads, we were like, we have to have her on. Because the topic, I think it's increasingly relevant, the topic of platonic friendships. So let me ask you, what got you into this in the first place? Because you wouldn't think you could make a whole career and best-selling book, New York Times best-selling book out of it.
So I would say I guess it was probably a decade ago. I went through a breakup and I felt really bad. And I was like, maybe I'll feel better if I create this wellness group with my friends. So it was like we would meet up and do wellness, meditate, cook, do yoga. And I looked around at my friends and I was like, why do I feel like I didn't have love in my life without romance? Like, look at this. Like, this is love. Or I felt like I wasn't worthy without a romantic partner. And I was like, well, look at all these people that see me as worthy and valuable. And I just thought to myself, like, what are these messages I've internalized about this hierarchy of love and what form of love counts and what form of love doesn't? And I just really felt like, well, this is reflective of a larger cultural issue. I don't think it's just me. And so I wrote Platonic because I wanted to level that hierarchy by showing people how to make friends.
And what have you noticed? Because obviously it's a New York Times bestselling book. So a lot of people were buying it and sharing copies. So what did you notice that people resonated with?
Yeah, so what we get wrong about friendship is people really think it happens organically. And that's because in childhood, it kind of does, because you have these ingredients. Rebecca G. Adams, she's a sociologist. She says when you have repeated unplanned interaction, like I see you every day, school, work, and shared vulnerability, it happens more organically. But if you think about your adult life, often we don't have environments with those ingredients. Like maybe at work, you see people frequently, but you're not necessarily getting vulnerable. Often people feel like they put on this work persona. So that means if you're relying on the same set of assumptions from childhood and adulthood, you're going to end up lonely. And research actually finds that when you look at people over time, those who think that friendship happens organically are lonelier 5 years later. So I tell people you're going to have to try and you're going to have to initiate. But then, of course, people are like, I don't want to be rejected. Like, that's scary. So I like to share this research on something called the liking gap, which finds that when strangers interact and you ask them how much they like each other and how much they think they're liked, they underestimate how liked they are by one another. So fundamentally, people like you more than you think. And that brings me to one of my big tips that has really resonated with people, which is to try to assume that people will like you. Now, again, this is based on research on something called the acceptance prophecy that finds that when people are told they'll be liked, they become likable, even if that's not true. You just tell someone, you're going to be liked, and then they become friendlier, warmer, more open. Whereas when we think we'll be rejected, we reject people. We're cold, we're withdrawn.
How would you say this topic has become not just more relevant, but even more necessary? Like, how has society changed to make us so deprived, really, of a lot of friendships or valuable ones?
This is a great question, and people don't realize that it actually started in the 1950s. There's this great book, Bowling Alone, and he looks at all the factors that determined why people were becoming more and more disengaged. And he finds that the television was the most culpable factor, because before that, people spent leisure time around their friends. And now they had these sort of relationships with people on the television that gave them a snack of connection, so they didn't need the whole meal. So it's kind of been declining since then. Of course, we had a major surge in loneliness in 2012 with the creation of the smartphone, because now we have our own private televisions.
Wow.
And so it's just been getting worse and worse from there. Like people think it's just the pandemic, but this has been happening for decades.
The pandemic kind of like exacerbated what was
Yeah.
already bad.
Yeah.
It reminds me really quickly, because Mona and I actually had a conversation about this in an episode about how so many things we used to do in community, now we do alone. Watching a movie, ordering food, ordering takeout. Like so much of it is even private pools, what used to be community pools.
Yep.
And how it robs us of those spontaneous, consistent connections or meetups that would just happen in the past.
Yeah.
How would you see it from your perspective?
I would say we need to start interrogating convenience because, there's this idea that our first value is convenience with the way society is run. Like, I don't have to go to the grocery store. I don't have to go to the library. I can go on my Kindle. I don't have to go to class. I can watch it virtually.
You just attacked me 3
because I was just telling her the story of like I bought this painting and we couldn't fit it into our car. And so we were like, oh, it's fine. We'll just call Uber and have it delivered. And as we were waiting for the Uber, I turned to my husband and I'm like, isn't this funny that back in the day, there was no Uber. You had to call a friend and say, hey, you have a pickup truck. Can you come and help me out?
Yep.
But because of that convenience, we no longer need our friends. Exactly. So when they need us, we're like, oh, can you not call an Uber?
Exactly. So it's been a loss.
Yeah. So convenience, you say, is
convenience culture. Convenience culture, because we don't realize that we are sacrificing connection often.
So then, I guess conversely, community. It reminds me of a. I think it was a video that I saw online that if you want community, you have to be prepared for inconvenience.
Yeah, absolutely.
What does that mean?
Well, that really makes me think about, there's these things I call diagnostic moments in friendships, which are moments we use to diagnose the overall health of the friendship. And they are when we are at our highest and lowest, because when we experience high emotion, we tend to remember things more. So how did you react when I got that promotion? Were you like, I got to take you out for happy hour? Were you like, wow, I'm surprised I gave it to you,
Damn.
But also like when you were sick, when I was sick, did you like come bring me some soup, or, was it mum and silent, right? And so it's particularly important in those diagnostic moments to put in the effort to show up, because I know we're all really busy and we're not going to be able to show up all the time. But when your friend has a high or a low, that's the moment to follow through.
And when is it too much though? Because I did have a friend that it's like, okay, now this is turning into a full-time job. Like there's always lows. And I felt like there was just not ever a high.
Yeah.
And so then I felt like I was taking on the burden, and it felt like a burden, right?
Yeah.
So like every time we hang out, you're complaining.
Yeah.
So is there like, am I a bad friend then in that situation?
No, you're not. I mean, in Platonic, I talk about like there's a difference between dependency and friendship. Because like as a friend, we should have resources in ourselves and we have resources in other people. In a friendship, vulnerability should be a part of it, but it shouldn't be all of it. Like we can think about it as one ingredient in an overall pie, with like fun together, with affirmation, with us doing maybe routine things together, right? Like all of those make for a relationship that's more well-rounded, like a friendship, rather than a relationship that feels more like dependency.
What do you think when you hear people say, I'm low maintenance? I want a low maintenance friend. I'm low maintenance. Do you hear lazy, or do you hear that's a healthy friend or friendship?
What would go through my head is like, are you not in touch with your needs?
Ooh.
Sorry.
I'm going to reveal myself. Sorry. Hypothetically.
Why, elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, because it's really normal to have needs, right? Like, I think that's just like part of being human. We are in this like network of interdependence, right?
And I guess dependence, a healthy dependence fosters
the interdependence.
Closeness.
Yeah, and exactly. Like, people want to love you. And if you're just completely self-sufficient, you limit the ways they can love you.
Oh, I love that. That's
I didn't think this was gonna have your life.
Yeah. Girl, love you. Love you. But no, I think it's a great way to reframe it, because I see it from her perspective. Hypothetically, her perspective, this person that we're talking about, is you also don't want to be a burden.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So when you think in your head, like, if I tell you that you're likable, and then all of a sudden you're more likable. If I tell you, like, no, let people love you, then you're going to open up more, because it feels like less of a burden.
Yeah. And here's the tip I tell people, because like what I know from the research on friendship is when we think about how our behaviors come off to others, we perceive it more negatively. But if someone did that same behavior to us, we would perceive it more positively. So I say, if you're afraid to ask for support, which I'm often afraid to too, I think that's really normal. Instead, I'll ask myself, well, what would it be like if this friend asked me for that? And I'm like, I would love to help them. I would love to express my care for them in this way.
Yeah.
Like the fact that they trusted me to help them. And so that helps me have a more accurate prediction of like what it'll be like if I ask them.
Yeah. That makes me think of how people talk about friendship. So for example, we all probably know the girl who says, I don't have girlfriends because it's easier for me to get along with guys.
Yeah.
What do you pull from that?
I mean, I guess like women aren't a monolith. Like we're so complicated and we're so heterogeneous. And so what is the assumption behind what it means to be friends with women? Is it like this very kind of narrow definition that like women are catty or they stab each other in the back, right? Like this kind of sexist portrayal of friendship, because like my friends aren't like, I'm sure most of our friends aren't like that. And so I think it's hopefully about like bringing more complexities that whatever you're looking for in a friend, you can find in a woman.
To your point though, are female relationships, like, you know, between women, inherently either more toxic or complex?
Yeah.
Unnecessarily?
Than men? Great question. So Danielle Beyer-Jackson, she's another friend expert who does great stuff on women's friendships. And she really finds that just when you have more intimacy, you have more expectation. And because there's more intimacy in women's friendship, there are higher expectations than men have for each other. Women may not be able to get over things like men do because, again, there's like this heightened level of intimacy that tends to happen. And so that can make it harder to navigate. It's maybe harder to get grace out of your guy friend will be like, oh, that's fine. Your woman friend will still want to bring it up. Yeah.
That reminds me of there was, you and I talked about it too, about how like guys will get together. Like my husband didn't know for years what his best friend did for a living. I'm like, you don't wonder where is he from 9 to 5? How does he pay his bills? Right? But or even like if a friend gets like divorced and you're like, I'm like, well, what happened? I didn't ask any questions.
Yeah.
When did it happen? I don't know. It sounds like it was recent. Is he okay? He seems cool. We went out for a drink. Like, do you notice, is that stereotypical? And is that good or bad?
Yeah. So what we see just from like a research perspective is men are about half as likely to be vulnerable with their friends in a given week, half as likely to express affection with their friends in a given week. So it's actually quite starkly different, friendship based off of gender, in ways I was honestly shocked by until I wrote Platonic. And it was like, oh, wow, like we really are inhabiting different worlds. And that also, I would say, affects romantic relationships, right? Because you have women being used to deep intimacy and vulnerability and expressions of affection, and then men being used to in their closest relationships, like companionship, like we're doing things together. And then you have these sweepingly different expectations and coming together in heterosexual romantic partnership. And then women also tend to be better about keeping their friends, while men don't as well when they enter into romantic partnerships. So it's like these friendship differences that also end up creating complications in romantic relationships too.
Oh yeah, me and my husband butt heads about that very early on in our relationship. But I see it like when he's with his friends, it's like, sup? Like they change, right? Like they morph. And I'm like, we were just kikiing on the couch. So like, sir, who is this person?
It is radically different.
It's radically. They're just
really
so
different.
like this tough guy, kind of like, you know, like the voice changes and everything. And I'm like, stop.
But they still have each other's back. Like they're loyal. They hold each other down. It's just, you know,
there's definitely loyalty.
But I will ask. It's also funny when we bring them around and then they're also all of a sudden in our business. And I'm like, okay. But then I will ask, because I feel like I find myself sometimes falling into that trap of, you know, we work a lot and my husband is my best friend. But sometimes being like, it could just be the two of us. Like, I don't need to go out there. And like, because it's expensive out there. And sometimes meeting up with your girlfriends means paying a lot for dinner and doing all this stuff. And so sometimes I fall in the trap of just, oh, you know what? I could just hang out with my husband on the weekend and the next weekend and next weekend.
Yep.
What are some of the downfalls of that though? Where your partner is your only friend?
Yeah. Well, I think you lose pieces of yourself because each relationship brings out different sides of you, right? And so, you know, the part of you that comes out with your husband might not be the same part that comes out with your friend. And so it's almost like you start feeling like you're kind of like whittling down a little bit in ways that I will say we don't always notice, right? Because there's this way that it becomes a kind of learned experience that we're used to and it feels fine. But then when you hang out with a friend, you might be like, oh my God, like I feel like I'm brought back to life. I didn't even know I was missing that, right? And so there's actually this form of loneliness called collective loneliness, which is the desire for a group working towards kind of like a common goal. And so, you know, even if we have the intimate loneliness fulfilled through our romantic partners, we still have this greater need to be in group and community with people.
You and I have something in common. We both love Esther Perel.
Oh, nice.
And one of the things that she says that I think is so powerful is how we expect from our partner what we used to get from a community. So we want our partner to be our confidant. We want him to like hold us down, to be our therapist, our bestie, our fitness guy, like all of these things. And before, a whole community gave us that. So we set ourselves up for failure, really, and disappointment because they're not fulfilling. She even goes as far as saying, we would, even in the spiritual realm, like what we expected from a God, we expect from our partners.
I know, it's kind of wild, right?
So what is your opinion on that? Do you think we really take it to that level?
You know, I think with like this concept of the love marriage, which is very recent, right? It used to be you marry someone because your family told you to and they had resources. So only in like the last century, like I kind of agree. Like we expect so much from our partners. It's almost like we fetishize romantic partnership. Like I think of it like we're like anxiously attached to romance, but avoidantly attached to friendship. And we can get into attachment styles later. And so, yeah, it does create really high expectations and it tends to harm relationships. Like research finds that, you know, if I'm in a relationship and I have more friends, not only am I less depressed, that spills over to my partner. They're less depressed too.
Yeah. I knew it was bad when I told this man, I'm like, I learned a new blow dry technique. And bless his heart, he's listening, but I'm like, oh, you're not the right person. Like, I need to just get up and call Jeannette because he was like, oh, word. And I'm like, yeah, I used to use the roller brush this way. But I do want to talk. So let's talk about friendships and maintaining friendships because I feel like a lot of people have fallouts with their friends or the opposite, they avoid confrontation. Is confrontation bad? Should you avoid it within friendships?
No, absolutely not. I mean, this was, I think, the biggest growth that I went through writing Platonic is like I would try to avoid the conflict and I would try to get over it myself. And I felt like, oh, me being a good friend is getting over it. But with my best friend, like a series of little things accumulated and I didn't want to hang out with her. And I was like, wow, like I might be losing one of the closest relationships because I'm not bringing up issues. And simultaneously, I was reading this research that people that engage in conflict in an empathic way actually experience more intimate relationships than people that don't. And this psychoanalyst, Virginia Goldner, says you could have this flaccid safety where you feel safe because no one brings up the issue, or this dynamic safety, rupture, repair, rupture, repair. And for the rest of the friendship, whenever there's an issue, you have this precedent of repair. And so it's just like, it almost protects the relationship in the long term. And so that really taught me that like actually being a good friend is bringing up problems so that you don't just withdraw, which feels really crummy to be on the other side of because it's like, wow, this friend has held me guilty without giving me a chance to defend myself, really. And so, you know, even for me, when I confronted my best friend, it was like one of the things that I was upset about was like, I sent her a chapter of Platonic for her feedback and that she didn't respond. But then she was like, oh, I emailed you back. I was like, you emailed me back? And she was like, yeah, I think you might have missed the email.
So you were fighting ghosts.
Exactly.
Oh, man. It could just be simple as miscommunication.
Yeah,
It's crazy how many friendships go down because of miscommunication and not bringing up the issue.
Right.
How would you say your childhood and your other relationships, maybe in your upbringing, influence how you handle conflict resolution, if at all?
So much. So in Platonic, I really draw on this theory called attachment theory, which is this idea that in our early family relationships, we create this unconscious template for how people will respond to us that we carry throughout our lives. And it becomes truer than the truth, right? Like what we assume or what we suspect in a relationship. And so people that have a more insecure attachment where they didn't get their needs met in childhood, they tend to go into conflict with something called anger of despair, which means that I have no hope that this will go well. And so the only thing that I can do to like feel better is kind of like attack or put you down or vengeful or like withdraw, right? Whereas people that have that more secure childhood, they have learned that people care about my needs. And so they will engage in what's called anger of hope, which means I use my anger as a sign that I need to reconcile something with you. And so, you know, anger of despair looks like, you know, you're a bad friend, you suck. Anger of hope says, I miss you. I miss being close to you. And like, this is what I would need. And I want to figure out a way forward for us.
So what if a friend and I are on opposite sides of the spectrum? Like, is that someone that you're actively trying to work things out with? Or are the odds against you for that friendship to be successful?
If the friend is not ready for the conflict, but it's important for you. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Like if you have attachment styles that are kind of very, very different.
It does make it hard. I mean, the anxious attachment style where you tend to fear that you're being rejected all the time, fear abandonment. So you try to cling really close to people. You tend to be a lot more sensitive. And the avoidant attachment style, where you're literally the opposite. You tend to peace. You tend to like abandon, take your space, pull away, withdraw. Too much closeness overwhelms you, right? Like that can be a really difficult match because you're both kind of in this cycle of triggering each other.
Yeah.
When do you know you've outgrown a friendship?
What a great question. I feel like it depends on how you feel around that friend. When after the friend you feel like you're drained or you feel like you're a smaller version of yourself, then that might be a sign that you've kind of outgrown the friendship. Like I think friendships generally should be more rewarding than not. Of course, if you think about it like a book, there's going to be chapters where that's not true. But if that starts to become the whole book.
For me, it's when the conversation is just not what I want to talk about. When it just seems like we're talking about things that I'm like well past or no longer interested in. But what about if that friend is just in a different chapter? So like, say my friend just had a kid and they're like neck deep in their motherhood chapter and I'm not there and this is no longer the friend that like we have going out in common or even just the conversations are different.
Yeah. I mean, I think people that end up maintaining their friendships, which by the way, it's very normal for friendships to end. Every 7 years, we lose about half our friends, according to research. But the ones that maintain are the people that have this kind of secure assumption that friendships are flexible and not fragile, which means we'll have seasons where we're less close, but that doesn't mean that it's over and it's just asleep. So at any time I can kind of revisit this, right? And so when you go through those life stages, there's this faith that, oh, like when it starts working for us, like we can take the opportunity to reconnect. The other thing that I suggest if you want to, as your lives change, if you want to stay close, is to be open to welcome each other into each other's unique worlds. And so there's this assumption that, you know, you're not going to be interested in my life of kids, or I'm not going to be interested in your like single life. But like, how can you intentionally show up in each other's worlds instead of assuming that lack of interest? Like a lot of times friends break down because of assumptions rather than actuality. Like I would love to hang out with my friends' kids. I love to take them out too, right? Even if a friend might not assume that.
What would you say is the peak time where we tend to be in the most community, have a lot of friendships, and we're interacting with them in a fairly healthy way?
Yeah, so peak friendship, well, this is a complicated question because you have the most friends at around 25. And there's a reason for that because at that time, your goals for your identity is to expand your sense of identity. And so you're looking for different types of people to bring out different sides of you. As you get older, your identity kind of tends to solidify and you tend to look for quality over quantity. So this is very natural as different life stages happen, right? Because you're just thinking about, you know, I don't have endless amounts of time like I felt like I did in my 20s, so I want it to be really quality. And so people tend to start like whittling down their friends and keeping the friends that are very meaningful to them.
What I thought was interesting about that is in the news business, we've moved around a lot, right? Every 2 years, you move to a town that you don't know a single soul. And I went to therapy for the first time. I think I was like 27, 28 years old. And I was telling her like what's going on. And I remember it was one of my first sessions and the therapist said, I think you're lonely. And I was like, lonely? Like, you see my friends. Like, I go out on the weekends, this and this. And I was actually offended. And I think I just stopped seeing that therapist after a while because I was like, you don't get it. Clearly, like you're
breaking up with your therapist.
I was like, no, this ain't for me. For some reason, I could not get that out of my head. And I just pondered that forever. And she was right.
Yeah.
Because I did not understand that it doesn't matter. You could be lonely and have a lot of people around you.
Exactly.
And what she meant was I didn't have like deep connections with anyone around me. And she was right.
Yeah.
Because I was moving around so often.
Yep.
Can you elaborate just on that and like just reframing the word lonely?
Yeah. I have such a similar experience. So when I had my first job as a professor, I was administering a questionnaire to assess people's loneliness. So I was like, might as well take it myself. And I was coming into the office every day. So I was like, I'm around people every day. Like I'm not lonely. And then the questions were like, I feel known by people. Like I feel authentic around them. And I was like, I'm lonely? What? And so I figured out in real time while I'm literally administering this study that inauthenticity is also a form of loneliness.
And there are real ripple effects to your health, mental health.
Yes.
Even compared to like smoking, drinking.
Yep. Yeah. The commonly cited statistic is loneliness is as toxic for your body as smoking. 15 cigarettes a day, right? Like no one smokes 15 cigarettes a day, but people are lonely, right? And the reason that's happening is because when we are lonely, we enter into this heightened stress state. Because from an evolutionary perspective, you were lonely, you were in danger. You're separated from your tribe and you become hypervigilant for signs of threat. So when we're lonely, we tend to see everything is more threatening. Everyone is more threatening. We see rejection when it's not there. We're more hostile to people. Lonely people like their roommates less. They like humanity less. Like, it's very hard to connect with people when you're lonely for this reason, because you're prioritizing safety over connection, really, because connection feels so unsafe. And so lonely people actually report wanting to withdraw from other people, even as they want to connect. They wake up in the middle of the night and engage in these micro wakes, which are like tiny moments of waking up to scan the environment to make sure that they're safe and then going back to sleep. And because of that, actually, if your friend becomes lonely, you are 58% more likely to become lonely because of the different behaviors.
Wow.
Yeah, non-social behavior, antisocial behaviors that loneliness can really trigger on us. But I say that, and I also want to say that we also shouldn't blame ourselves for being lonely, because this is like a natural biological process we all experience, because most people are lonely, which to me means it's not an individual issue, it's a systemic issue.
There's like a couple of ways, you said so much there, a couple of ways I want to take it. First, it reminds me about the Surgeon General who said, was it like an epidemic at this point?
Yeah.
Loneliness, particularly here in the US. So I want to get your thoughts on that. Do you find that it really, really has gotten that bad? And what are the generational impacts of that?
Yeah, I think it has really gotten that bad. We are looking at a mental health crisis for teenagers, where about half of them meet criteria for a diagnosable mental health issue. And there's nothing more compelling than loneliness. Lonely people are like 17 times more likely to consider or complete suicide compared to people that are non-lonely. So functionally, we'd almost eradicate suicide if we could eradicate loneliness.
And it sounds like you're going against your very nature when you talk about how we used to operate in tribes and that type of thing and in community. The other thing I wanted to ask you is, when you said if your friend is lonely, you take on, actions or characteristics that lead to you being lonely yourself. That must apply to your partner as well.
Oh, totally. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Even your siblings. Yeah. It's pretty much anyone around you who's lonely.
So you want a partner who's also connected. It's got his friends and that type of thing.
I mean, I hate when it feels like there's all of this tension, like don't hang out with your friends, hang out with me, because like you hang out with your friends is you showing up better for me in a romantic relationship. To me, like having a great romantic relationship friendship is so symbiotic with one another.
I want to get back to that, because there are some people whose partners prevent that and stop them from forming community. But first I want to ask, because we live in these big cities, but still we work a lot, the older you get, I feel like in college it's easy to make friends, fresh in your 20s it's easy to make friends, but in your late 20s, early 30s, how do you make friends?
Yeah, so it's almost about trying to recreate the environments in your life that you had as a kid. So I talk about the importance of something called the mere exposure effect, which means if through merely being exposed to you, I like you more and you like me more. And that comes from seeing each other over time. Research finds that, for example, when women are planted into a large psychology lecture, at the end of the semester, nobody remembered those women because it was a large lecture, but they liked the women who showed up for the most classes 20% more than the women that didn't show up for any. And so it's unconscious, right? And what that means is, can you find ways to have repeated exposure? I think sometimes when we want to make friends, it's like, I'll show up for like one happy hour. I say, no, show up for something repeated, like join a class, join that language class, join that walking group, join that hiking group, or become friends with people you already have repeated exposure with. Become friends with your neighbor or your colleague, ask them to hang out outside of work if you like them, right? Capitalize on that mere exposure. But and the other thing that mere exposure shows us is that sometimes it's uncomfortable at first because we don't have mere exposure. The problem is we often eject from the connection because we're like, oh, this isn't working, this is uncomfortable. So I try to tell people, well, if you're not dreading it, wait 2 to 3 months because you're going to experience it very differently and they're going to experience you very differently over time. Like the discomfort is not a sign to eject from connection. It's a sign that you're in the process of connecting.
So since we value platonic relationships and friendships and all of that, a man, for example, he's in a heterosexual relationship, having a female friend, it's his good friend, childhood friend, and there's something he gets out of that friendship. Do you think that a man should have a close female friend if he's in a relationship?
I do. I think that there should be like trust. optimally in your partnership that would allow it to be about, I trust my partner, and so I'm okay with them being friends with people of different genders, right? But I know it can feel like really threatening to some people, but I think what I've learned in Platonic is to kind of really complicate like the picture we have of romance, which is that really asexual communities have kind of pushed the idea that romance is also part of friendship. Like there's friends that feel where you feel warm platonic connection, but there's friends you feel, I'm passionate. I want to be around you all the time. I want to hang out with you so much. You're my soulmate, like some women best friends you hear them say. And that is almost romantic. Like it's not sexual, but it's romantic in nature. And so we also have maybe these same gender friendships that feel kind of romantic. And if like any signs of romance are a threat to the partnership, then you wouldn't be able to have those either.
Yeah. You said something really profound about when that shift happened, with Sigmund Freud kind of leading the way, that these same-sex, or was it same-sex friendships or whatever, kind of being taboo now if you feel that kind of romantic feeling toward your good friend.
Yeah, so basically in the early 1800s, there's a lot more intimacy in friendships, especially with like the same sex. Like friends would go on each other's honeymoons, they'd carve their names into trees, like share beds together, hold hands, no one batted an eye. What was happening at that time was that it was taboo to like have sex with someone of the same sex, but sexual orientation as we know it didn't exist as an identity until Sigmund Freud, this other guy, Richard von Krafft-Ebing, they're like, all these people are moving into the cities, they're having all this like gay sex, and we don't want that to happen. And so now we're going to create this whole theory that places that as a disorder. And so it was a disrupted Oedipal complex. And in that, they created the idea that sexual orientation was an identity. And that means that now an identity is so much more ambiguous than a single act. And so now if you're holding hands with friends, well, maybe you have that identity. If you're loving your friends too much, maybe you have that identity. And this has really harmed male friendships, where researchers have called it homohysteria, which is the fear of being perceived as gay, which limits any acts of intimacy that men feel like they can take in their friendships.
I was telling her, like, if you go to the Middle East, you'll see men holding hands and it's totally platonic. They touch noses to say hello and it's totally fine.
Yeah.
Here,
oh yeah.
No, it's like, it's actually, it can be dangerous for you to do such things. But also I feel like I'm the type of person when I'm watching a movie and there's a man and a woman who are like best friends, if they eventually get together, or a sitcom, and there's, the male character and the female character eventually, like, they start off as really good friends, or there's like, bickering back and forth. If they eventually get together, I'm a little disappointed sometimes, because I'm like, why does that always have to be the end?
Right.
Why can't you guys just be friends who crack up?
Yep.
It's hilarious, and we move on, and you're with someone else and I'm with someone else, and that's totally fine.
Exactly. It's so embedded in our culture. Like we say things like, we're just friends, implying that it's kind of lesser than, or we say if men are too close, it's a bromance, right? That now it has to, come with romance. And so there's just, and I think Gen Z, research has found that they're kind of wanting more friendship stuff, that the tides are changing a little bit in this kind of narrative that like the be all end all is like getting into romantic partnership.
I was telling Jeanette, I have Gen X friends, and their foot is on my neck. Like, they will invite me to everything. They follow up. If I tell them, we're remodeling something, they're like, how did it go? Aww. And I'm just like, I realize that I'm the problem, because they're being great. Like, they invite me to dinner and they have such great community, but I'm like, girl, I'm tired. Like, and when you say no twice, you're not gonna keep bailing. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna show up to this. Like, if y'all ask me for a favor, I'm gonna do it. But I realize it made me realize that there's a generational difference when it comes to friends. Yeah. But how do you know if you're the bad friend?
How do you know if you're the bad friend? Well, I think I would take a step back and think of what a healthy relationship is. I think in general, not platonic specific, is I'm considering both of our needs. Both of our needs are important. I'm not trying to sacrifice for you, and I don't want you to sacrifice for me when that's putting you outside of your capacity. And the bad friend, I guess, is the friend who consistently expects the other person to sacrifice for them.
Going further on that point, how do you figure out if you have a problematic pattern when it comes to friendships? So you're the one who keeps on having falling out. Is it, I just find really bad friends? What is it that mean?
I just keep it real. I hate that one, because you're like,
there could be people who like aren't good at spotting like a
That's
good
very
person,
true.
right? You
Yep.
attract problematic people.
Yep.
But then it could be, no, I have a pattern here.
Right.
Problem.
Right. Yeah. That is true. People could be, attracted to people that can't necessarily show up for them. Or sometimes you're such a good friend that other people can see that light and they're like, I want a piece of it, And so people that kind of drain you can be attracted to you. I would say, like, really, probably the defining feature of the bad friend is just you're very low in perspective taking. You tend to just think about your own reality, right? Like, for example, in the book, I have this write-up of this woman who was sick, chronic health issues. Her friend had a dance recital. It was the middle of the pandemic. She's like, I can't go. Like, I'm sick. I'm scared. And that friend, you're a bad friend. How could you do this to me? How could you not show up for me, right? And she's really only thinking about her own reality and not considering the other person's reality. And now that tends to, when we are triggered, when we are in pain, we tend to be like that, even if it's coming from a benign place. Like, I'm just so focused on my own hurt, right? But I think being a good friend requires you to take a step back and be like, oh, there's another person on the end of this, and maybe how they're treating me isn't just about them trying to harm me. Maybe there's a larger story here, and I'm going to stay curious rather than stuck in my story.
So it doesn't have to come from a place of narcissism.
No, I mean, there's vulnerable narcissism, which is I'm the victim all the time. But it doesn't necessarily really, I think often we're bad friends, quote unquote bad friends, and it really can just come from a place of pain, that I'm just too hurt to be able to see anything outside of my hurt.
What do you do when people mistake your kindness for weakness?
Ooh, you got to set some boundaries
Yeah.
at that point, right? Because you want to mix like kindness is like such a pro-social act that takes care of other people, but you want to make sure people know that, like, you're also taking care of yourself. And so if people want you to do something that pushes you past your own comfort, you have to be able to say, like, I'm not able to do that.
Yeah. How much can you speak to just cultural, going back to what Mona said, cultural differences? I know, like, the U.S. is very individualistic.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I got to look out for number one in many ways. Other societies, it's more communal.
Yeah.
How does that affect friendships and the way they operate?
Oh, man. I remember I had a Nigerian friend. She was like, you know how you all treat your romantic relationships, we treat our friends. I was like, oh, man.
Dead ass, though. Oh, my God.
That's real.
Because, yo, man, whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think, our paradigm for friendship, specifically in the US, even amongst like women who tend to have closer relationships than men, it's often about emotional intimacy and a lot less of like what's called instrumental support, which is like doing the actual like kind of labor of friendship, like, pick up my art for me, or show up at the hospital or babysit my kids.
Yeah.
Like, all of those tasks tend to be a lot more normalized in other cultures. And I wonder if part of it is like, we're a relatively wealthy country. So we outsource these things that used to be normal to depend on each other for.
Yeah.
We outsource them to money.
So, question. Do you pick the friend up at the airport?
I would say
We're in DC. We got to go to Dulles.
No,
the
it's-
traffic
oh,
is brutal.
Dulles, not Dulles.
Do you pick her up?
I would say you pause and you do a little bit of checking in, which is sometimes when you have too many friends, you become a bad friend because you're spread too thin.
Okay.
And it's about knowing who you want to show up for and invest in. And you'll only be able to be a good friend to fewer people rather than a mediocre friend to everyone.
I love the nuance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, because what I was going to ask you, and sometimes I feel like it comes from what you just said, which is the friend that does stuff for you, and the minute you can't show up for them, it's like, oh, I get taken advantage of. And you're just like, ain't nobody asked you to do all of that, right?
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
almost like they want to be that sacrificial lamb, or like
Yeah.
that's their identity.
Yeah.
Like, people walk all over me because I'm so giving. And it's like, you're doing too much almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we call them in the research these unmitigated givers. And what we see is that compared to people that give but also have boundaries, they are less happy than those people that have boundaries. And they're more burnt out, and they're experiencing less intimacy,
Yeah.
right? Because, when you want your intentions and your desire to match up with your behavior. So if it's for a friend that you love and you want to take care for, and you're showing them up at the airport, that's going to feel so differently and burn you out so much less
Yeah.
than when you feel like I'm obligated and I have to, and I don't necessarily want to do this for this friend, right?
Yeah.
And that is why I think that first process of thinking through who are the people I really want to show up for, and not putting my pressure to do that for everyone, because otherwise you're going to burn yourself out.
There was one friend where it was like a lot of buying gifts and doing and I started kind of like getting anxiety because I'm like, I feel like we're setting ourselves up for like disappointment because she was able to do a lot more than I could in that time.
Yeah.
When that happens, is it bad? Because I felt bad. I'm like, well, step up to the plate, Jeannette. Is it fair to say I gotta, step away. I can't give this person what they're expecting?
Yeah. If that's what your capacity is, like, yeah. I mean, and that is, to me, isn't like a reason to like not try and not show up, right? Because I think we have to balance like an understanding of my own capacity, which like a genuine investment and willingness to like do the work of friendship. Like, because I think sometimes people take that as like, anytime I'm inconvenienced, it's beyond my capacity and like, self-care culture, right?
Yeah.
But I think it isn't more nuanced. Like I love Prentice Hemphill. They're like a somatic healer, and they say like boundaries are the distance between which I love you and myself at the same time. And that's really what they should look like a mutual act of love. I know I can give to you more if I slow it down right now.
Friendship breakups. Do you ghost them, or do you have a sit down and you're like, we can no longer be friends?
So when you lose a friend and you don't know why you lost it, it triggers something called ambiguous loss, which means your grief is much more complicated because you don't have a sense of resolution. And so it just makes it so much harder on a friend when you ghost on them and you're not honest, even though it's so uncomfortable to do. And we don't normalize it in our culture at all. And at the same time, when we lose friendships, it already triggers something called disenfranchised grief, which means that because we see friendship as a lesser relationship, there's less permission to grieve. And so not only do we feel like other people don't want to hear about it, like they might if we went through a divorce, and then we invalidate our own grief. And really the only way to get through grief is to grieve, right? You have to feel those feelings. And so it's already just like really hard to grieve friendship for those reasons. And that's why I think it's kinder to like bring it up. But it shouldn't be that the first time you bring up the issue is when you're breaking up the friend, right? Like hopefully you bring up the issue and you give them a chance to repair first and work through it and see if there's room for that. And if there's not, then yeah.
So you bring up the issue even when you've made it up in your mind. I'm like, this is a wrap.
Well, no, then you go back in time earlier, a few months ago, before you got to the place where it was a wrap. So you could have brought it up earlier.
But I guess I'm saying, like, if there have been bumps along the way,
yeah,
finally it's your final straw.
Gotcha.
You know that this no, I'm just saying, you know that this discussion, like a lot of people say, I'll bring it up if I feel like there's chance for resolution.
Yeah,
Why
yeah.
have this discussion if I'm essentially I'm just notifying you?
Yeah.
I'm putting in my 2-week friendship notice.
but how important is that?
Right. Okay. So I would say, like, I'm thinking through there's no chance for resolution piece.
Right.
Is that because you feel like this other friend can't hear it? Is that because you feel like this is really something fundamental about their friend?
Fundamental, and we keep on running into the same wall.
Okay, and you've tried to work through this before. Okay. I mean, if you've tried and put it on the table and it's not working, then yeah, I think you can accept that.
Yeah.
And it's okay to not necessarily have this discussion. You can kind of slowly distance yourself.
Well,
or
it
you're saying
depends.
either way.
I
talk
think
about it.
if both people are distancing themselves, that's okay because you're not triggering ambiguous loss. The
I
other
see.
person's like trying to pull away too. So you're like, all right, at least we're on the same page about this. But if one person seems invested and the other person doesn't, that's when it's you got it. What do they say? You got to be cruel to be kind in that situation. That makes
It's
sense.
so uncomfortable though.
It's so
like
uncomfortable.
I'll put myself out there and just say that I'm the type of person who like I'll just slowly distance myself until you get the point or you just don't have access to me anymore.
Yeah.
Because I feel like sometimes I assume I already know where this is going. Like if we're good enough friends, I already know that like your defense mechanisms are gonna come up and I just don't want to deal with that right now.
I didn't think you were like that. I thought you were more, I'm like that.
Yeah.
I'm working on it. Because what I find is that it's going to be either extreme. Either I'm going to really stand my ground and it's just going to end things on a bad note because I end up feeling bad for saying, no, actually, this is how I feel and I'm standing by it. Or I give in to what they're saying and I don't defend my point. You see what I'm saying? So I'm just like, let me just avoid the conversation entirely because it's a lose-lose. I don't get that from you.
I'm only thinking of certain people. So these are people that I just know your personality and I know that if I bring it up, you're going to be like, well, or like, and I just don't like, I don't even think it's worth trying to tell you about yourself.
Yeah.
Because normally it'd be easy just to be like, hey, Jeannette, like, I didn't like when you did X, Y, and Z. But when it comes to certain people, I'm like, all you're going to hear is attack. And you're just going to get right into being defensive.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
I will say though, now that you mention it, in the time that I've done it in the past, looking back, I do feel like I owed that person. Even if it's like for when they're ready to receive this in the future, you know why this ended. You know why this didn't work
They'll
out.
appreciate it in the long term.
They'll appreciate
even if
it
it's
in the
hard
long
in the short term.
Yeah. So it's not like an immediate, it doesn't always have to be an immediate reception of your message.
It probably won't. I mean, a lot of us get really defensive in the moment.
Right.
Have you guys ever had friendship breakups that felt like relationship breakups?
Oh God, yeah.
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 It sucks.
It's
It
like what you said, you feel like, am I being dramatic? You don't find the
Am I being
space,
dramatic?
right? And the validation that like I think you may have even said it's just as hurtful. It can be as a
Exactly.
woman,
Intimacy is intimacy. It's not like, oh, it's platonic. So my heart is like, now I will not break.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you say to people now? Like, how do you shift your view on your platonic relationships and your romantic? Like, how do you level the playing field from a personal perspective? What does that look like?
Yeah. So the first thing is, if you want to level the playing field, know who are your people you want to love. Right. Because you can't do with all your friends.
Right.
Then you just get overwhelmed. So pick the 3 maybe that you do really want to invest in. For me, it was literally like I had a friend. I knew I wanted to invest. She was arriving back from Mexico at like midnight. It's like, ooh, I'm a morning person. I hate staying up late. And I thought to myself, I literally went through knowing that romantic love has kind of monopolized our view on like love. I literally asked myself, would I do this for a romantic partner?
Ooh.
And I was like, yeah, I would. Yeah, I would. So I went and I picked her up.
Oh, there
That's
y'all
a
go.
good way to put it.
If you got a friend down bad for a man, she's doing his laundry. I'm just kidding. I do want to ask you a concept that people have brought up, which is interracial friendships.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people out there who are like, I don't, and I see this particularly, let's say, like, let's talk about the United States, right? Like, where Black women don't feel comfortable getting close with white women because of the history of this country and the racial relations of this country.
Right.
Is that wrong?
I think Black women want ease. And sometimes when it feels like at any moment you might be stereotyped or perceived through a lens in which you're no longer feeling like you can be your authentic self or be received as your authentic self, there's this desire to just be in places where you can be seen as you are and not have like racial projections. Especially, I think, in theories of racial identity, there tends to be during periods of strife where there's like, highly publicized things affecting the Black community, there tends to be this desire for Black people to want to withdraw into community with other Black people. And then there'll be this fluidity, right? Maybe when there's, I don't know if there's a period of less strife, but less publicized strife, I don't know. You're not consuming that media as much, then you might be more open and you might be more malleable.
Yeah. I want to talk quickly about there was an article I read, The Art of Doing Nothing with a Friend. How these days, we're guilty of it, Mona. I know, self-awareness. Everything has to be a production, right? Like if we're going to hang out, let's whether it's shooting content or let's plan this. One time we wanted to just literally relax because we were working too hard. We were like, let's plan a getaway. It's going to be a whole other project. But my question is, have we lost the art of doing nothing with a friend? And what's the benefit of that?
I think there's this book, Big Friendship, and they put it so well. And it was like the intimacy of the mundane. And I also have heard it called, and I don't remember the source, but scruffy hospitality, which is like, you're going to come over and I'm not going to go out of my way to find, clean the house or find anything. And I think that just comes with a level of vulnerability, like who I am when I'm at rest or not trying to entertain you, that creates closeness. Because it's like, oh, you trust me enough to let me into your life when it's not perfect and shiny, or when we're not doing things to entertain each other. And there's this trust that we still are invested. We still even enjoy it.
Yeah. The best is a friend where you can just not talk for 30, 45 minutes. You're just sitting on the couch taking it.
Yeah.
There's no discomfort.
The Somali in me died, by the way. I was like, mess in my house. Nobody could see that. Thank you so much. By the way, we've learned so much. I know we talked about your book, but tell people where they can find it or any other things you want to plug in.
Yeah, so you can find my book, Platonic, How the Science of Attachment Can Help You Make and Keep Friends wherever books are sold. Also, I'm on Instagram sharing tips on friendship at Dr. Marisa G. Franco, DrMarisa G Franco, and on my website, drmarisagfranco.com. You can reach out for speaking events on belonging or belonging at work, or take this quiz to assess your strengths and weaknesses as a friend.
Take this quiz to find out about yourself. Find out if you're the problem.
We're all lonely.
Last thing, do you have any projects in the future? Anything that we should be tapped into?
Yeah, I am currently writing a book that feels like the prequel to Platonic because it's called Secure-ish, on how you can become secure in yourself.
Ooh,
Dr. Franco, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate
pleasure,
it.
My pleasure.
And thank you guys for joining us for another episode of Off the Record. You can find us, of course, first subscribe because it helps us, y'all. And then you can find us at Off the Record Podcast on Instagram and all the other platforms.
See you on the next episode.